love showing off all the games I own for a system that was discontinued before I was even born. Anyway, we all know the Mega Drive was a great system by now, so let's talk about some of the top tier games that made it such a great console alongside stuff like Sonic and Streets of Rage. That's right, motherfuckers, Shinobi. There were 3 Shinobi games on the Mega Drive, and I'm going to talk about them in release order and tell you why they're all so great and made the Mega Drive worth owning. Yeah, spoiler alert, sorry to bore you with a positive review again. Developed by Sega R&D 2, Revenge of Shinobi, aka the Super Shinobi, was originally released in late 1989 and is the direct sequel to the original Shinobi arcade game from 1987. To make a long story short, it's a hard as fuck game where you play as a ninja throwing shurikens and shit. It's pretty fucking good actually, but we're not talking about that game today. What we are talking about is, dare I say, the best early Mega Drive game. Now, despite the fact that I absolutely love the Mega Drive, I'm not really a fan of the earlier releases for the system, and I personally believe the best releases came out either midway throughout the console's lifespan, or right towards the end. Not to say I hate the early library or anything, but I'd really only go out my way to play a select few of them, this being one of them. So, what makes Revenge of Shinobi such a good fucking game? Well, let's take it from the top. The way Joe Masashi controls can take a bit of time to get used to. Yes, this Japanese ninja's name is actually Joe. The game can feel a bit slow and floaty at first, but you'll quickly get used to it as the game as a whole is slower paced than your average ninja game, with levels based around precise platforming and strategic weapon usage, with the limited shurikens and ninja magic, as opposed to Strider or Ninja Gaiden's going all guns blazing approach. There are plenty of crates for you to break in the levels that give you such things as extra shurikens, making it harder for you to run out of shurikens, mind you. But when you do, you'll be stuck with shitty melee attacks as a way of penalising your retardation, and trust me, you don't want that. Unless you've got a power-up, which only lasts for 1 hit by the way, you're as vulnerable as white underpants. Other things you can get in crates includes extra lives, power-ups, and extra magic uses. You also have this double jump which can be a bitch to execute because you have to press the jump button right at the peak of your jump in order to actually do it. But it is at least satisfying to finally master it, and you'll absolutely fucking need to in some circumstances. It also allows you to do the awesome attack which rains shurikens down on your enemies, which is useful but consumes a fuck ton of ammo, so try not to spam it. Like most ninja games, Revenge of Shinobi can be fucking hard at times, and you really need to know how to approach this game, from picking off enemies in tricky spots to being careful around crates, as some of them contain bombs which hurt you. From stage 2 there's already tricky platforming, and stage 3 is a fucking death trap for newcomers who'll quickly have to get used to the plane switching mechanic that's exclusive to like 2 levels or some shit. Stage 7 is such a fucking pain in the ass. There's one jump which you need to be spot on with,
or else you will die.
But even then, there's a part earlier in the level where an enemy is highly likely to hit you and cause a death due to knockback, which can be countered by the lightning shield magic, but then you can't use the jump magic. What a shitload of fuck. And with that, I guess I'll explain how magic works. It's mostly utility based and makes certain things within the game easier. You have the lightning shield which protects you from getting hit, prevents knockback, and potentially allows you to keep your power-ups for a longer time as you lose them when you get hit. There's also the fire magic which just acts as a screen nuke, the jump magic which makes you jump higher, making platforming sections easier, and the Elu Akbar magic which costs you a life to do but acts as a screen nuke and refills your health, which is awesome and especially useful for the tougher bosses. Speaking of which, by the way, all the bosses are fun to fight against and have a relatively smooth difficulty curve, with the exception of the stage 5 boss, which is just fucking boring. Each of the stages feel unique from each other with all the different settings and such. Well, okay, a lot of the stages are urban themed, though they all feel distinct at least. But they all still feel in the same world and naturally flow on from each other, which is something I always appreciate in 2D platformers. You have a stage where you're in an aeroplane having to avoid these open doors which suck you out. You have a stage where you have to avoid traffic on a highway while fighting ninja nuns, right after a stage where you have to climb up a huge building. a stage where you're on a train dodging pylons, a stage which makes my fucking eyes hurt, etc. There's tons of pop culture influences here, and they didn't try to hide that at all. I'm putting a spoiler warning here. I usually try to avoid spoiling shit in my reviews, but this shit is too funny not to mention. You have Rambo as a common enemy, then as a boss you have some muscle dude with sunglasses who turns more green every time you damage him. Is this the Incredible Hulk? Why no, it's the Terminator, obviously. You also go on to fight Godzilla, and by far the funniest one, Spider-Man, who, once beaten, transforms into fucking Batman. Let me repeat that, you fight Spider-Man, who transforms into Batman. Most of these lawsuits waiting to happen will change in later versions of the game, and there's around 5 different versions of the game due to all the copyright shenanigans. In later versions, Rambo was just changed to be a skinhead, Godzilla was changed to be a skeletal dinosaur, but most interesting of all was the Spider-Man and Batman boss fight. In current versions of the game, which are sold on like the Virtual Console or the Mega Drive Mini for instance, Spider-Man was changed into some pink guy, but in some of the earlier revisions of the game, Spider-Man was changed into Spider-Man. Sega had the rights to use Spider-Man at the time, so they just made Spider-Man look even more like Spider-Man. So, what did Batman become, I hear you ask? Devilman! Yeah, just replace one copyrighted character with another. No one will notice. Fuck it. And to this day, they're still using the Terminator and Devilman in the versions they're selling. Fucking mad lads. Oh, and another thing that was changed in later revisions was the title screen, which originally used the likeness of actor Sonny Chiba, but in later revisions they changed it to just some rando's face. I believe they actually had permission to use Sonny Chiba here, but I'm not entirely sure, so don't quote me on that. The thing I love most about this game is the atmosphere. I can't quite explain it, but a lot of it has to do with the amazing music by Yuzo Koshiro of Streets of Rage fame. I think the best example would be the game's intro, which just would not have the same impact without the music. Pure badass. The first stage then opens up with a sunset to nighttime in this old Japanese village, with this chill-ass music playing, setting the mood for the first level before shit gets intense! Now, I don't know anything about music theory, and I'm not gonna attempt to act like I do know shit, but I will say that the rest of the music is great and fits each moment it plays to. Anyway, I'll be playing the music from the game for the rest of this review, so it's just up to you to decide whether you like it or not. Okay, I'm at the final level, and let me say, this level is a pain in the dick. Not only do you have this really fucking hard dock segment, but after that, you have this long, confusing maze with honestly the worst track in the game playing. This music wouldn't be bad for like a short segment in a level or something, but this short loop just fucking drones on. It reminds me of that one track in Ballast 1, though thankfully it's not quite as gay as that music loop. As for the final boss, he's able to kill you in about 4 hits, so we absolutely need the Allahu Akbar here. Or you could just get good. But on top of that, your Asian girlfriend is about to get crushed, so you have to not only focus on avoiding the boss's attacks, but you also have to kill him fast as shit, and hit this part in the wall constantly in order to slow down the wall that's about to crush the girl. Otherwise you get the bad ending. I'd say this is a good fight overall, mind you, but no pressure or anything, you know? The end. Wait, that's it? No credits roll? Well, as it turns out, there is a credits roll, but it's exclusive to the Japanese version for whatever reason. I guess the people who made it just didn't want us filthy gaijin to know who they were. Well, you know what, programmers? Fuck you. I'm coming to your country and impregnating your women. So, Revenge of Shinobi is great and already one of the best Mega Drive games. How can we possibly get any better than that? Okay, who thought this box art was a good idea? Just look at this shit. Awful. Now, compare this to the fucking awesome Japanese box art, and god fucking damn! Well, at least we got the best Sonic box art. Shadow Dancer is an interesting case. It was released around a year after Revenge, and despite being developed by the same studio, it's very different to Revenge, and that's slightly due to a completely different team working on the game. Let me explain. In the 80s, Sega's focus was mainly on the arcade scene, so despite there being multiple development studios for their arcade games, Sega only had one development studio for console games until around 1991. The whole thing was kind of a fucking mess. But anyway, this game is loosely based off a 1989 arcade game with the same name, but all it shares with that game is the general mechanics and the main character. Otherwise, it's a completely different game, which is probably a good thing, because I've heard that the arcade game isn't very good. This game plays a lot more like the original Shinobi than Revenge does. The game generally has a much faster pace. All magic is just a one-time use screen nuke as opposed to being utility based. The objective of most levels is to rescue hostages and then make your way to the exit as opposed to simply just getting to the end. Though despite this, levels are more straightforward in design than Revenge of Shinobi's. And most notable of all, one-hit deaths. Basically, Shadow Dancer is much more of an arcade game than Revenge of Shinobi. Whether you see that as a positive or a negative is up to you. I find this game to be the easiest to pick up and play out of the trilogy due to this, but it's also the hardest of the trilogy. But before we talk about that, let's talk about controls and mechanics. Controls are simple. And then you have the dog, which can use to stun enemies with by holding the attack button until this fucking meter is full, and then letting go when the dog is stationary and barking. Useful for tricky enemy placements, which is pretty cool, but thankfully this mechanic isn't overly forced, and you don't really need to use it, with the exception of Stage 4-2, which is designed around not being able to see shit. So you pretty much need to use the dog in order to not fucking die. Something I like is that when you leave the dog hanging onto an enemy for too long, or simply when you send it after certain enemy types, it gets hurt and reverts back to being a puppy, in which it's completely useless until it grows up again when you get a power-up. Which, might I add, you get from rescuing the one female hostage in the level, meaning this game literally objectifies women, which is fucking based. Going back onto difficulty, would you believe that one-hit deaths can make this game quite tricky? This game is all about taking your time to analyse enemy placements and behaviour and figuring out the best way to approach them. Trying to rush through the game will get you nowhere. Enemy placement and behaviour is the same on every playthrough, so I guess some of it could be considered trial and error, but in reality you just need to get good, you fucking journo jobber. But the hard part comes when you're just fucking swarmed with enemies and you have little room to manoeuvre. The ninjas will be the bane of your existence, especially in Stage 5, which I like to call the Jobber Gauntlet. As the name suggests, it's a gauntlet of regular enemies before the final boss. Speaking of bosses, meh, they're okay I guess, though pretty forgettable. The Stage 3 boss is a fucking pain in the dick though, with a small hitbox that you can only hit for a couple of frames, and spoilers, but Jesus, the final boss is hard. You just get fucking swarmed with ninjas in this fight. But yeah, I like the gritty urban feel of this game, with most of the game being set in ruined city streets and final level being in some shady warehouse. Not to mention the music, which also has a gritty urban feel with its beatboxing and godlike bass, which makes the soundtrack stand out as one of the most unique on the system. In particular, the bonus stage theme and the theme for Stage 3, 2 and Stage 5 are so fucking good. I definitely prefer Revenge of Shinobi's soundtrack, but this is also good. I don't know where to stick this by the way, but interestingly, the protagonist of this game is different depending on the region. In the Western version, you're simply playing as Joe Masashi, but in the superior Nihongo God version, you're playing as his son, Hayate Masashi. This, of course, is just another example of silly localizers making up shit that sounded about right. But honestly, who cares? I know this review wasn't particularly long, but it's a fairly straightforward game, so just look at the footage and you'll easily get the gist, you fucking brainlet. Play it, it's a good challenge. Okay, so let's move on to... Wait... Oh god, it's the Twin Towers.
Well now, Mr. Clyde, your fame and fortune shall fall just like these twin towers. They go crumbling down with an airplane. You are weak. I'm the strong one. You are going down, Mr. Clyde Cash.
Released in 1993 as a direct follow-up to The Revenge of Shinobi, Shinobi 3, the Super Shinobi 2 in Japan, was developed by a mostly new team once again aside from the planner/coordinator of Revenge returning as supervisor. This game had an interesting development cycle. It was originally supposed to come out back in '92, but a sort of Resident Evil 1.5 situation happened, where just as the game was about to be finished, they scrapped everything and restarted from scratch, with only certain ideas carrying over into the final game. Why? Because the reception from the journalists who played the near-finished prototypes was a resounding, it's alright. So now we have this game. There is a very early build of the original Shinobi 3 prototype floating about online, though unfortunately the near-finished build is still yet to be dumped and is likely laying around forgotten in some Japanese geezer's attic. Alright, enough fucking around. This game is my favourite Shinobi game and is like my third favourite game on the Mega Drive. This game is fucking awesome. As previously mentioned, this is a direct follow-up to Revenge, and thus plays much closer to that game than Shadow Dancer did. So, general mechanics such as utility-based magic, limited shurikens and crates which contain the same shit work the same way, though there's a couple of other movement options new to this game, such as running, climbing, wall jumping, blocking, dive kicking, which all help to dramatically increase the pace of this game. This game's a lot more straightforward and mindless than Revenge. Whilst that game was more about taking your time and approaching things in the right way, this game is more about just fucking shit up, and I absolutely love it. It's so fun to just run up to an enemy and slice them in half or dive kick them. Joe in this game is one of the most fun characters to play as in a 2D platformer. Granted, you are usually rewarded for going out of your way and exploring the levels, but overall the level design is extremely linear. There's also a couple of vehicle levels which are also fun and serve as a nice break to the usual levels. I mean, these are so badass. You have a robotic surfboard making Joe a literal surf ninja, and you also have a fucking ninja horse. This game is just badass all around. The intro, which opens with a text scroll of the enclosed instruction booklet on top of a moonlit night sky, transitions to Joe looking all badass before fucking killing you. Then, when you start the game, shit's just blowing up everywhere. It's like Michael Bay's Wet Dream. Not to mention the absolute feeling of depth these levels provide thanks to the highly detailed backgrounds and use of parallax scrolling, and just the fact that this game looks fucking great for a Mega Drive game. And on top of that, it has an impressive frame rate that never dips. Now just imagine the fucking frame rate on a SNES. Fucking console would blow up. As for the bosses, they're all cool in design and fun to fight against. Especially the final boss, who pretty much requires the Allahu Akbar in order to beat. Otherwise, he can be a tough motherfucker. The music's pretty good in this one too. Granted, not as good as Revenge of Shinobi's, but then again, not many things are. Honestly, my only issues with this game is the fact that half of the levels take place inside of mechanical bases or facilities, which gets kinda dull after a while, and while you could say that Revenge and Shadow Dancer had an abundance of urban theme levels, in my opinion it's much easier to make something interesting out of an urban environment than a facility, and this game has mechanical facilities or bases in 4 of the 7 stages, so unfortunately that fucking sucks. And the game is too easy in my opinion, easily the easiest of the trilogy. Honestly, I can't think of too many tricky segments other than the fucking rock platforming segment of Round 6, Traps. I rarely ever use the magic in this one aside from the final boss. and I usually play on expert mode. To be fair, I did pretty much spend an entire summer with this game on my PSP, so I kinda know this game like the back of my hand, but it's not very hard at all. Otherwise, it's a great game. In fact, all of them are, so go play them. These 3 have been included on countless amounts of game collections, which I'm sure you can easily find in your local bargain bins. If you're wanting these on original hardware though, then ooh boy, don't trust stupid motherfuckers on eBay, but Revenge of Shinobi should be cheap. Shadow Dancer should be a bit more expensive than that, but not too pricey. And Shinobi 3 unfortunately is quite expensive, and is actually the most amount of money I've spent on a game myself at 60 quid. Of course, I am referring to PAL versions of each game. Not sure about the US or Japanese versions, but yeah. Or, you know, you can just emulate them.